Hello everyone, and thanks for hanging out with us for the Behind the Numbers Weekly Listen, a new marketer podcast made possible by Smartly.io. This is the Friday show that reviews the most critical media news stories of the week. I'm your host, Marcus Johnson. In today's show, what Peloton's recent struggles mean.
And I think what's not always talked about in there is the sheer power of community that they have. It's not just that people subscribe and pay a subscription and live in isolation working out in their apartments. People feel like they're a member of the Peloton community.
Rebranding for digital.
This is one of those situations where I'm not fully convinced that the impetus of it is for the digital age, when it's basically trying to say something's new that is basically routine.
Amazon Prime at any price.
Amazon seems to think that if they charge more for Prime, people will actually buy more stuff to get their money's worth out of the membership fees, so they have us exactly where they want us.
Google's cookie alternative, an unpopular opinion about NFTs, and internet in the sea. All right, folks, join me for this episode. We have three people. Let's meet them. We start with our principal analyst who covers our marketing practice. It's Dave Franklin.
Hey, Marcus, how are you?
Hey, chap. Very good. Welcome to the Weekly Listen. We're also joined by our principal analyst who heads up our advertising and media practice. It's Paul Werner.
Great to be here.
Hey, fella. And finally, we have one of our analysts on the retail and e-commerce team. You know him as Blake Drosh.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
There he is. Ladies and gentlemen, there he is. All right, what do we have in store for you today? Well, 4 segments as per usual. We start with the story of the week, what Peloton's recent struggles mean. We'll try to figure that out. We then move to the game of the week, what's the point, where our contestants, Dave, Paul and Blake, try to give us the best takeaway they can from each of the 4 stories we have for you to try and win the championship bout. We then move to a relatively new segment called Uncommon Knowledge, where we unpack some unpopular opinions about random things, and then we move to Dinner Party Data, where we talk about trivia and things we just recently learned. Let's start at the top, as we always do. Story of the week, what Peloton's recent struggles mean. The pandemic was the best thing that happened to Peloton until it was the worst, writes Emily Stewart of The Verge. In 2020, Peloton bikes were flying off the shelves. Their stock shot up. People waited weeks and months for bikes and treadmills to be delivered. Fast forward to 2022 and supply has caught up, but the demand is waning. CNBC recently reported that the company hit the brakes on the production of its products for at least the next 2 months. Not a good sign if it's true. However, Peloton denies these claims. As insider intelligence analyst Rachel Wolf points out, at its height in 2020, Peloton's market cap was nearly $50 billion, 50 by mid-Jan of this year. Peloton was worth roughly $9 billion. So, gents, whoever wants to kick us off, your take on the Peloton situation.
Well, I mean, I think one of the inflection points for me anyway was when they dropped the price of the bikes, and then I think they did it again. And to me, that suggested it was almost like in that moment in The Wizard of Oz where you see the man behind the curtain, because it suddenly brought to light that the bikes were overpriced to begin with. And, you know, it was almost like an artificial luxury item. And then they started pivoting toward presenting themselves as basically a subscription company or a content company, not so much an equipment company, all of which I think is valid. You know, they're probably all of the above, but it just seemed like a kind of a muddled message. And, you know, just the part about the pricing, like I'm not a Peloton owner, but if I had bought a bike for $2,000 and suddenly it was $1,400, I don't think I would have been too happy about that. So I don't know how actual customers felt, but I think it's been a tricky journey for them.
How do people feel on the cutting of the price? Because Peloton, Paul, to your point, they started cutting prices on its original bike and released a less expensive treadmill as well. The Wall Street Journal thinks some of those price cuts worked for a while as sales of its products, excluding treadmills, jumped 5 times over after it lowered the cost of its bike in August 2021. I'm trying to figure out, should they be continuing to cut prices further to make their bikes more appealing to the masses, or does that devalue the brand too much and they should just remain, you know, kind of steadfast as a premium brand?
So bear in mind that the drop in price was actually tied with them bringing out a new bike that was more expensive. So they had 2 tiers of pricing. I think that, to Paul's point, they are a subscription company. Their retention is outrageously good. And I think what's not always talked about in there is the sheer power of community that they have. It's not just that people subscribe and pay a subscription and live in isolation working out in their apartments. People feel like they're a member of the Peloton community. That's a massive asset that should be baked into that $9 billion valuation. They're absolutely an acquisition target for the right company, but I think probably the biggest asset is that community aspect rather than anything else.
Yeah, I think, overall, really, Peloton was sort of positioned as being this company that was really ripe for the pandemic, but that was really only one side of the coin. One, being people want to work out at home. The model's already set up for in-home workouts, distance, whatever. The other side of that coin is that you are also selling a product that is very large and hard to manufacture. So when we talk about all of how hard it was to get a sofa or a bed during the pandemic, and now with the ongoing supply chain issues that are being caused in part by the pandemic, Peloton suffered from that end of it as well. And if you look back at sort of where their troubles are now, a lot of it has to go from the fact that they were super, super high in demand and short on supply, and then maybe missed the mark on that calculation in terms of how things were going to level off. Mm-hmm. But almost something that, given the world that we lived in today and during that sort of crunch time, is really difficult to foresee. So I think what we're going to see now from Peloton is that course correction, which is going to, maybe take them down from the pedestal a little bit. But as Dave and Paul mentioned, the bread and butter here is the subscription base, and it continues to be have a really high retention rate. So I don't think that sort of putting them in the red because of this sort of moment right now is maybe as warranted as a lot of these critical pieces are making it out to be.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the miscalculation. Simeon Siegel, analyst at BMO Capital Markets, put it nicely, saying the primary question surrounding Peloton was, did the pandemic pull forward demand or did it expand the audience size? And it seems to have just basically pulled forward demand, at least up until now. You both mentioned, Blake and Dave, the retention rate. Peloton CEO John Foley also noting Peloton has less than 1% churn rate, meaning people never leave. Even some independent analysts say it's up in the 90s, the 90% range. And the community as well, which we mentioned. Peloton, strong customer base, over 6 million members. That includes digital-only subscribers, people who use its app but didn't buy any equipment. And as of November, it had 2.5 million connected fitness subscribers, people who own one of its products and pay to use its fitness content, spin or running classes, things like that. Dave, you mentioned the acquisition, then being an acquisition target. And there was some speculation or suggestion that Apple could be a good suitor looking to build out its fitness subscription and wearables business. As Jason Ayton puts it of Inc.com, he was saying, is Peloton the missing piece in Apple's fitness puzzle? Any thoughts, or did you guys have maybe another suitor in mind?
So I think Apple makes sense from certain aspects, right? It is beautiful hardware, high quality product, targeted at affluent buyers. There's a natural fit to so many aspects. You could say that it's also a fit for Amazon or Google or Samsung or others.
Yeah.
All of those would feel like a better fit to me than sort of the mirror going to Lululemon, which we saw a couple of years ago. The price has come down low enough that it's chump change for some of these guys. So you may end up actually seeing the valuation go up if you end up in a bidding war, because I don't think they'll be independent for that much longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the points Mr. Ayton was highlighting. Apple, they've got the money. That's for sure. Number one. Number two, there's no greater forecaster of demand or manager of the supply chain than Apple, something the Peloton could use some help with right now. Number three, Apple wants to make fitness a core growth area, leaning on its Fitness Plus piece as well. What it doesn't have is any compelling first-party hardware. However, some of those names you threw out, Dave, do make a lot of sense as well. I was really staggered at how much competition Peloton has. Think Now Research, October 2021, ownership of smart fitness exercise equipment among US adults by brand. Peloton's up front, but only just 32%. Mirror, surprising, in my opinion at least, 31%, just behind Peloton. Nordic Track, 29. So it goes Peloton 32, Mirror 31, Nordic Track 29, Tempo 25, Fight Camp 22, etc., etc. And it keeps going. Soul Cycle at home bike further down the list, and maybe like 9th or 10th with 16%. So there's a lot of competition they're going to have to battle with. Also, some suggestions that gaming could help. As pandemic sales wane, Peloton turns to gaming to keep its momentum. Gregory Leparati of the Washington Post wrote this relatively recently. He was writing that earlier this year, so 2021, the company indicated it was heading in this direction when it announced Peloton Lane Break, a rhythm-based game that will become part of its subscription service for Bike and Bike Plus members early this year, 2022. I thought that could be quite compelling, whether it's games, against different members within the Peloton community. You could create some kind of Mario Kart version where the faster you pedal, the faster your car goes. There's that Subway Surfers game where you dodge from left to right and try to collect coins as you go. So I could see gaming being a thing potentially. Finally, folks, is this recent Peloton news a sign of things to come for companies that flourished during the pandemic, or an outlier?
I think it's probably an outlier because two other companies that come instantly to mind as having flourished during the pandemic are Netflix and Zoom. And I think both of them will transition quite successfully and have been transitioning well to the post-COVID peak world, so to speak. If Peloton doesn't, it will have something to do with the pandemic, and it'll also have something to do with miscues that the company made. But I just don't see that there's that much. That I don't see that the other companies, at least the ones I mentioned, are in a similar distressed situation, notwithstanding Netflix's, lackluster quarter that they just had.
Yeah.
I guess the big difference there, Paul, would be the hardware versus software issue, right? Where Peloton is reliant on that supply chain Marcus mentioned, and it's a big expensive product in addition to the subscription.
Yeah.
On that note, though, we're seeing it going into buildings, right? So you're seeing it going into gyms and in a big apartment buildings, so they can get multiple subscription revenues from a single or from a room full of bikes, but way more people subscribing than there are bikes in the room.
Yeah. All right, that's all we've got time for the story of the week. Time now for the game of the week. But first, quick word from our sponsor, Smartly.io. Hi to all the social media marketers out there, listen up. Social platforms have become more important than ever for brands, you know this. So if you're looking to scale your social advertising in 2022, look no further. Smartly.io is number one in social media advertising. They help brands automate every step of the process by combining creative production and ad buying to unlock greater performance. To get the brand new 2022 social advertising trends report, go to smartly.io/themarketer. Right, folks, we are back. It's time now for the game of the week. Today's game, what is the bloody point? Where I read out 4 stories and have contestants Dave, Paul and Blake tell us what they think is the main takeaway of the story. Okay answers get 1 point. Good answers will get you 2. And answers that give you the same feeling as when you read a sentence that makes you laugh out loud and you legit don't feel alone, even though you are technically alone. Answers that leave you with that feeling will get you 3 points. Each person gets 20 seconds to answer before they hear this. It's a bell. Whoever has the most points wins, gets the last word. We start with Paul. Rebranding for digital. Century-old cheese brand Velveeta is the latest brand to replace the shine and dimension in its logo with flat simplicity. Red flowing text over a golden yellow background, explains Paul Hybert of Adweek. He notes that in recent years, Burger King, Volkswagen and Warner Brothers have all done something similar in hope that the redesigned logo signals the business has transformed or entered a new period. Paul, rebranding for digital, what's the point?
I just don't get the argument that more stripped down logos look better on small screens. And I think that was one of the rationales. If you remember, in the first several years of the iPhone, the app icons had light and texture. And to me, they looked great. And then Apple suddenly reversed course and made them very flat. To me, that was a move in the wrong direction. And I feel the same way about this change. I mean, I'm all for simplicity, but I'm also for a little more personality and creativity in design.
Interesting, because so logos with excessive details don't look good on a smartphone was the note from this article. Andreas Nichols, senior partner and global executive creative director at consultancy Profit, was saying it's important for brands today to make something legible and easy to recognize in a sea of content. Paul disagrees. Dave, what say you?
You see logo updates sort of all the time, and they tend to go in cycles. So companies tend to make similar changes and updates to their logos. So attempting to redesign for the mobile era makes perfect sense. I guess my big takeaway from the article is that no matter what you do, I would never, ever recommend referring to your logo as creamy.
Even if you're Velveeta?
Solid advice.
Especially.
Especially if you are. Blake.
Yeah, I agree with Dave. I think, all brand marketing is essentially a flat circle, and what's new is old, and what is old becomes new again. And it's really, this is one of those situations where I'm not fully convinced that the impetus of it is for the digital age, when it's basically trying to say something's new that is basically routine, which is the constant minimalization of logo artwork and then gradually building upon it until it's time to reset again. You see the same thing with sports teams logos, right? Retro night, we're bringing it back, and then all of a sudden they're switching back and forth. So it's a cycle.
Yeah. Bloody Heat. Miami Heat. Enough with the hot pink. It's just distracting. Anyway.
I want the old Astros uniforms.
Old Astros? What are we looking at there? Houston Astros?
Yeah, the Houston Astros, their uniforms from the 70s. Priceless. Look it up.
Look it up. Do your research, for crying out loud. Nichols also notes that in the past, brands felt pressure to tell the whole story through their logo, but with social media, a logo serves more as part of the experience instead of being the experience. We move to a second round. We start with Dave, Omicron's effect. 52% of US adults believe it will take over a year before they can resume living the way they did before the pandemic, per the January wave of an Axios and Ipsos poll, notes eMarketer Briefing Director Jeremy Goldman. What's interesting, though, is that this figure is the highest it's been since Axios and Ipsos began asking that question nearly a year ago. The share of folks who had gone out to eat in the past recent week was 46%, down from 54% last month. Its lowest point since April of last year. Around the holidays, airlines cancelled thousands of flights according to data compiled by FlightAware. Walmart, Macy's, and Apple are just a handful of retailers that have reduced store hours or temporarily closed locations due to rising COVID cases. Dave, Omicron's effect, what's the point?
I don't think we have a clue. I think it is changing daily. I think by the time these surveys are complete, the information is out of date. Couple that with the fact that what we say doesn't match what we do. If you look at Europe right now, they're sort of at peak, and Ireland has actually lifted restrictions this week. Couple that with complacency, fatigue, boosters. I see us getting back to normal way sooner, but I think in our heads we think we're not.
Who bloody knows? Blake.
I think that things move so fast. I was just looking, this survey was conducted on January 10th. We're recording this 15 days later. The sentiment is, and you could speculate, is infinitely different at this point compared to what people were thinking in the frame of mind that they were when this survey was fielded. I mean, if you live in a place like New York where cases have just plummeted so quickly, nobody could have really seen that coming when this poll was taken January 10th. So I think everything needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because we're looking at what consumers say they're doing versus what they're doing with these polls, but also just because things are changing so much more quickly now compared to any other sort of pulse that you can take.
Paul.
Yeah, the Delta and Omicron outbreaks are an unpleasant reminder that this virus is persistent and adaptable. And to Dave's point, nobody knows what's going to happen next. I mean, the silver lining is that with this outbreak, the symptoms seem to be less severe, but there is an overall feeling of backsliding where, we thought we were all getting back to normal and now suddenly we're not. And what I worry about, not to be too gloomy about it, is that there may be another mutation. There probably will be another one and another one after that, because by all indications, that's how the virus works.
Yeah, the recent Economist article was making predictions on this year, all kinds of things. And one of them was, I think it was like a 90 to 95% likelihood of a new variant of some description this year.
We'll all know the Greek alphabet by the end of it.
I know. Well, I was wondering why they jumped from Delta to Omicron. Were there a bunch of other ones in between? That
yeah, there were.
Like smaller substrains.
And there were reasons why each one of them was ruled out, including
Got
that
it.
they sounded like common names, and like there are specific reasons for not using them.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to say look it up again because it sounds arrogant, but if you do look it up, you'll find some good information about it.
It's no more arrogant than you saying that you have a butler, Paul. Unbelievable.
Yes.
We move to our third round. We start with Blake. Amazon Prime at any price. For folks in the US specifically, it has become hard to imagine online shopping without Prime, writes Shira Overday of the New York Times. 150 million Americans are members. We can't imagine not ordering stuff on a whim and having it delivered quickly for no added cost, she writes. But would you stick with Prime at any price? Miss Overday questions. She asked because some of the financial experts who follow Amazon are speculating it could soon raise the price of a US Prime membership. She notes that Prime's most recent cost increase in the US was about 4 years ago when the price went from basically $100 to $120. The prior Prime price increase was 4 years before that, meaning that it might be time for another bump. Blake, Amazon Prime at any price, what's the point?
Well, if you look at consumer surveys showing why people use Prime, time and again, it's always free shipping and fast delivery. And Amazon's competitors, especially through the help of Instacart and Uber and all these other intermediaries that are now entering the sort of non-grocery restaurant delivery space, are getting a lot better at offering that. But it's also about that flywheel of services that you're getting with Prime, that even if the price does go up and other competing retailers can offer that core fast free shipping, is going to keep Amazon's competitive advantage going forward. So I think, yeah, they could raise the prices.
Paul.
Yeah, sometimes it seems that the laws of supply and demand and even the laws of physics don't apply to Amazon. Because normally I'd say, if they go too deep in raising prices, they're going to risk a backlash. But there's a counter argument here, and this is almost insidious, is that Amazon seems to think that if they charge more for Prime, people will actually buy more stuff to get their money's worth out of the membership fees. So, yeah, talk about a flywheel. Or put it another way, they have us exactly where they want us.
Yep. Dave.
Yeah, to that end, I floated the idea a few years ago of cancelling Prime, and I faced a mutiny at home from my kids. What I would say is I think, like everything, there's an elasticity to any price. And the other thing is that they're not the only retailer with subscription. I think other companies have sort of copied them. In our house alone, we're members of Costco, Bed Bath & Beyond. Best Buy has introduced one. Walmart obviously has one. There's a whole bunch of these out there, and at some point, it's a question of value, and I think Amazon's biggest value is convenience. But as Blake said, there's 15-minute delivery. There's a whole bunch of other things that can start to eat into that, and people will pay it as long as they see value in it.
Yeah. Talked about Peloton's retention rate. Among Americans who have been Prime members for at least 2 years, nearly 98% keep renewing, according to Consumer Intelligence Research Partners, or CIRP. We move to our final round, Google's cookie alternative. We start with Paul. Earlier this week, Google said it's changing its plan for replacing the cookies that help advertisers target users to a new system called Topics, in which advertisers will place ads via a limited number of topics, like fitness or travel, for example, determined by users' browser activity, notes Sarah Fisher of Axios. Google has 350 topics so far. She continues that the new topics proposal replaces Google's previously announced plan called FLoC, Federated Learning of Cohorts, which was criticized by privacy advocates. Google says topics should make it easier for them to remove sensitive topics from being used to target users. So, Paul, Google's cookie alternative, what's the point?
I think the devil will be in the details. On the surface, it seems like a system that may not be effective enough for marketers or robust enough for privacy advocates, but we'll just have to see. I guess it's easy to see why something called Federated Learning of Cohorts failed on the name alone. So maybe what I recommend is, and with a nod to my two colleagues from across the pond, is that Google just start calling them biscuits.
As opposed to cookie. Well played. You don't get any extra points, though, but it was clever. Dave?
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think this is little more than an extension of Flux from what I can see. We're still personalizing ads to groups or cohorts. It's still, as Paul said, sort of potential privacy issues, I think especially related to GDPR. There's personal data, transparency, control issues. What I would say is at least Google is trying, but as Paul said, the danger will be it won't be robust enough. And I think if anyone stands to gain from all of this, it's probably Meta more than any other publisher, because I think advertisers may look elsewhere if this becomes a reality.
Blake?
Yeah, it does definitely just seem like a rebrand, but I agree with everyone else that, advertisers are going to find out very quickly whether any alternative that Google puts forth is worth the investment. And if it is, then, Google will have figured out a way to appease both sides. But if it's not, then advertisers are going to spend their money elsewhere. It's pretty simple.
So we've got time for the game of the week. Well played, gents. This week's winner, drum roll, it's Dave. Congratulations, Dave. First time playing. He came to play, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow.
Dave, congratulations. You get an imaginary championship belt. So here you go.
I had understood it was real based on all the previous episodes I'd listened to.
In theory, there is one, but I don't ship it round to people. We don't have that kind of budget.
It's an NFT. It's it exists in the metaverse now.
We should get that. We shouldn't. They're incredibly expensive for no reason. We'll talk about that later. Dave, but you also get the final word, which is 30 seconds of free airtime to tell us anything you want. If you've read a recent book that you liked and want to recommend, a recent show that you watched, if you want to rant about something, the floor is yours.
Can I use it to promote something?
Always. Hit me.
All right, good. My son's Eagle Scout project is coming up and everyone can participate. Go to planet22nd.org. planet22nd.org. He is organizing a global trash cleanup on a single day to demonstrate the impact that youth can have around the world on a single day. And
wow.
You can go to the website and record how much you picked up, and he's hoping to tabulate it and demonstrate the impact.
Wow.
The power of youth.
What a remarkable human. What's the site again?
planet22nd.org.
Oh my God.
And when you said you were going to promote something, I thought you were going to talk about your first ever insider intelligence report, which you just published.
I know.
You promoted that for me on the podcast the other day, or on the webinar the other day.
Remarkable. How old is this child?
17.
Who decided to save the world? Amazing. Remarkable. All right, that's what we've got time for the game of the week. Congratulations to Dave. He won it. It's time now for Uncommon Knowledge. Welcome to a newish segment called Uncommon Knowledge, where we offer up some unpopular or atypical opinions about things. We start with a few unpopular opinions about everyday things, and then ask one of our analysts for an unpopular opinion that they've been thinking about related to the media and marketing worlds. This new segment was inspired by BBC Radio 1's Unpopular Opinion feature, where UK callers give their unpopular opinions to host Greg James and celebrities who then react to them. So we'll take an unpopular opinion from that show to show you how it works. We'll take one from the internet that I found and one from one of our analysts related to work stuff. So the unpopular opinion from that Radio 1 show is the wave is pointless. So we're talking about the one where in packed stadiums, successive groups of spectators briefly stand, yell, and raise their arms before sitting again to create a wave effect. That's pointless. Thoughts?
I've been boycotting the wave since it started way back in, 1833 or whenever I first encountered it. I just refuse to participate.
How old are you? Refuse to stand. Okay, why, Paul? What's wrong?
I just sit there. I just think it, first of all, when I go to any kind of sports event, I'm really fixated on what's happening. My attention is totally on the game, and I just don't want to be distracted. So, and often when people do the wave, they don't have much of a regard for the timing. It's one thing if you do it like at halftime or if there's like a long break or something, but also the wave in a big stadium, it goes around for long enough that, you may have started it during a natural break, but by the time it comes to you or to the other side of the stadium, then suddenly you've got to like pay attention to what's happening. So
it goes on forever.
Not for me.
People never know when to quit. It just goes on for the whole time.
I'm all for chanting. I'm all for, getting really rowdy and passionate, but no wave. Sorry.
Yeah, when I was about, I must have been about, couldn't have been older than 10 or 11 years old. And I went to a Mets game, and it was a Friday night game. I remember this very, very vividly. They're playing the Phillies, hot July night, and the wave got going, and I was watching it. I must have been sitting along the first baseline, and it started out in left field. So, you watch it, it sort of builds up a little bit, then it dies down, then they get it going. But it takes a while for everybody to get it to go around once, right? It takes time to build momentum. So I'm watching it go around, and it gets to my section finally, and I'm getting ready to stand up. but I'm the only person in the entire section that stands up. Humiliating experience. Scarred me for life. Been anti-wave ever since. Will never participate in a wave. You can see me if Paul and I ever at the same event. We'll be the ones sitting.
There are only two.
Not to mention, if you're holding a beer or a hot dog or something, what do you do with it?
The worst. You got to stand up. It's on your. You have to get resituated once you sit down. It's a terrible experience.
Goes everywhere. Dave, feel the same?
I think the only reason it should ever exist is in protest to what's going on the field. If the entertainment fails, I think it's a perfectly good protest. Although I think a better one is what's known as the Poznan, where we come from in our neck of the woods, Marcus.
The what?
Probably in the UK, popularized by Manchester City, where the entire crowd actually faces the other direction and just jumps up and down. It's named after a city in Poland called Poznan. And they turned their back. Although in their case, it was a celebration. But to me, that's an even more appropriate sort of protest against your team.
Wow.
It's like a virtual
I never heard that before. Interesting. So, fun facts, or maybe I don't know if it's fun. It's a fact. So just you can decide if it's fun. The first recorded wave occurred in Oakland at an athletics playoff game against the New York Yankees, October 15th, 1981, according to ESPN. And actually, in the rest of the world, the wave is called...
Mexican wave?
The Mexican wave, exactly. Because
it's what it's known as in Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because viewers across the globe first noticed it in televised games of the 1986 World Cup from Mexico. All right, let's move on to another one. This one's from the internet that I found.
You can't mention the 1986 World Cup and just leave it at that without talking about who won.
Who won? The hand of God?
Can't remember.
Yes.
Let's just let's keep going.
Argentina.
It's Argentina. It's Paul.
His blue and white is coming out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Paul's got some Argentinian links, so that's what he's talking about. Let's not talk about it right now.
Here's one right here.
From the internet. But buying stylish clothes for babies is a waste of money. Oh. How do we feel?
Disagree.
Buying them specifically from the internet?
No. Internet shopping for babies is ridiculous. No. I found this on the internet, but the unpopular opinion is buying stylish clothes, however you procure them, for babies is a waste of money.
Well, I could see why people might say it's a waste of money because you are spending money, probably a good deal of money on clothing that is going to fit said child for only a very short period of time. But I mean, is it a waste of money or is it priceless when you see a kid in some really nice fresh Air Jordans and he's got the rest of the outfit and he's in the stroller and just going down the street and you can't tell if this baby is he's kind of like a baby, but he's also giving off the air like he's some sort of a mafia don, or he might be affiliated with organized crime in some way. I think that's just if you have to spend a little bit of money and the kid can only wear that for a couple of months, I say that's well worth it.
One of my big regrets in life is that my two kids were past the toddler stage when I saw a onesie, black, and it said, "I crawl the line." And if I just wish I'd been able to buy that for one of my kids.
Very nice. Dave, agree, disagree?
I've forgotten what the question was at this point.
Stylish
I
clothes
think
that's
for
the
babies.
point. That is the point.
Stylish is fine. Expensive is pointless.
Yeah, wrap them in a sheet. Be done with it. That's why I'm not a father. Anyway, let's move on to another one. This one comes from one of our panel. And Paul, you've got one. You've got an unpopular opinion for us today.
Yeah, NFTs. I just, I'm reading a lot about them. I'm trying to stay open-minded, but I don't get the point. They're either a curiosity or vanity thing for ultra-rich people, or they are being rolled out by, gaming companies and generating a ton of backlash because nobody seems to understand what they can do for them, for, the real person.
So really quickly, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, they're basically digital tradables.
I thought it stood for no fun tonight.
Any other thoughts, folks?
Yeah, I heard somebody describe NFTs as digital beanie babies, and I thought that was a very apt descriptor.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I think the original purpose of being able to authenticate digital ownership makes perfect sense. Where it has been taken is utterly absurd.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that summary.
Agreed. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, it's not to say that, in its current iteration, I think it is all of the things that we've described it as, but The idea that, there would be a way to basically prove ownership for things that are creative and are created digitally is obviously something that is going to have to be reckoned with, especially as the creative arts move further and further into the digital sphere. And if there can be a way that these can be leveraged to actually empower the creator without having to have another medium that some other company is getting rich off of, like a streaming service now that, should be unnamed but pays their artists, fractions of a penny, then that ultimately could be a good thing. But I think, right now, just sort of the early adopters and the people who are sort of controlling the narrative for the NFT, that is sort of something that's being talked about as the use case, but the actual practical use of an NFT right now, which just seems more status concentrated, is sort of obfuscating that point.
Yeah, if someone said to me now, they were like, came to hang out and they were like, let me show you this new NFT I bought. I'd think I don't want to say a poser, but I wouldn't be excited. I wouldn't be like, oh, cool. Like, what did you get? I'd be like, no, I'm all right. You can keep that to yourself. But maybe that'll change. It probably won't. Let's move to dinner party data, because why the hell not? This is the part of the show where we tell you about the most interesting thing that we've learned this week. And we start with Dave because he won the game of the week. Dave, what interesting things have you been learning?
All right, so I've lived in America for 23 years, but I have 2 weather apps on my phone, one in Celsius and one in Fahrenheit. Because despite living here this long, I cannot get my head around Fahrenheit once it gets cold.
It's ridiculous.
I just can't understand it.
Yeah.
So it got me thinking, and I started to look up temperatures. Anyone hazard a guess in either Fahrenheit or Celsius at the coldest temperature on record?
Negative
63.
40 Celsius.
Well,
I have an interesting fact on negative 40.
That's probably negative 1,000 million.
no, it's
actually
where they converge.
That's where they cross, is at negative 40.
And I went skiing once at Mont Tremblant in Quebec, and the
very
temperature
nice.
at the base was minus 20 Fahrenheit. And they were saying that with the wind chill up at the top of the mountain, it was minus 40. And I wondered, wait a minute, so minus 40 Fahrenheit, what is that in Celsius? So I discovered firsthand what Dave knows, that, that is the crossing point.
Huh.
So the coldest temperature on record was recorded in 2018 in Antarctica by scientists at negative 144 Fahrenheit, which translates to negative 97.7 Celsius.
Oh.
And just while I have the microphone, if you were interested, the hottest temperature was recorded in 1913 in the appropriately named Furnace Creek in Death Valley, California, at 134 Fahrenheit, 56.6 Celsius.
Did they send someone, like a poor intern, to do this recording, or is this by machines? Has to be by machines, doesn't it?
I have no idea. I mean, it was recorded by scientists is what I read, so...
That's a tough gig. Very good. Blake, what you got?
So as frequent listeners of this podcast know, I'm a big fan of surveys involving food, and I was very excited to see this one, but ultimately very disappointed by the results. And I think that's just, how it goes these days. So this is a civic science survey that was conducted earlier this month that asked about people's favorite pizza chain restaurants. So obviously, being a New Yorker and living in the tri-state area all of my life, it's obvious for us that there is no need for a pizza chain restaurant whatsoever in this area, because if you live in Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, there's always a local pizzeria that is going to be far better. But for friends of mine who have moved to the tri-state area but grew up elsewhere, bring up the app point that they didn't have always have good access to a local pizza restaurant, so they had to go to chains, and oftentimes you develop a taste for that chain, so there is some sort of affinity to it. And like people with sophisticated and accurate palates would usually come to the same consensus that when in doubt, when a pizza chain is the only available, it's Domino's. Domino's is clearly the number one pizza chain in the US. And I don't really think there's a comparison because all of the other ones are pretty gross. That's not what the consensus thinks, unfortunately.
Oh.
In fact, 35%, the most popular answer, said that Pizza Hut is the best or is their favorite pizza chain, followed by Domino's at 27%, Papa John's at 22%, and then Little Caesars at 16%. Shocking revelation. Really, truly shocking. Domino's is clearly the best pizza chain.
Maybe the survey was taken in 1998.
Actually, it was early January 2022, year of our Lord.
Was it a pie chart?
Yes! Extra points to Paul for no reason at all. Yeah, that is disappointing. Ugh. I don't mind Papa John's. Only because it was open late once and I was very hungry.
I don't
But
like how
apart
they
from
put
that,
that
it's
gross. They put that gross one jalapeno on your plain pizza, which looks like it's an accident.
Why is it there? That's kind of like pickles. That's how I feel about pickles. They're always there. Like, why is it there? No one orders the pickle, but it's just there. It's just lying there, looking up at you like, I didn't even ask to be here. They just put me in here with your food you didn't order.
It's like an NFT, unwelcome guest.
Very unwelcome.
I take pickles. I take a lifetime supply of pickles over an NFT any day of the week.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
probably would as well, and that's saying something because I
But
hate
not
pickles.
for today, but maybe for another time. We've got to talk about pickles because they're not all created equal.
That's true.
But they are all awful.
Yes! Finally! Extra points to Dave. The game's finished ages ago, Marcus, for crying out loud. We'll talk about hatred for pickles later. I wish we could just talk about that. Paul, what have you learned?
Well, I look forward to this all year. I'm kind of embarrassed to say because I'm such a geek when it comes to TV and streaming, but FX Networks just published their annual study of the number of TV shows produced in the U.S. Over the past year, and there were some interesting highlights. So for 2021, the total number of shows rose dramatically to 1,923, which is a 22% increase from 2020. And 2020 had been the first year since the financial crisis of 2008 when the number of shows had dropped. So that got people thinking, oh, is peak TV over? And it's clearly not. Streaming shows outnumbered cable shows for the first time ever. There were 922 streaming shows versus 726 for cable, so they vastly leapfrogged them by almost 200 shows. And there was also a big rebound in unscripted shows, aka reality TV, after 3 consecutive years in which that genre declined. So somehow reality TV is bouncing back. So those are just a few of the interesting tidbits from that annual study.
Wow, that's 6 to 7 shows, new shows every day.
Oh, I hadn't done that math, but yeah.
Saying that that's
Right.
probably wrong.
And
But
these
that's a
are
lot.
and you know, these are mostly shows that have at minimum 12, 13 episodes per season. So
Yeah, peak TV is nowhere near finished. Fantastic. All right, I got one for you guys. I wanted to talk about undersea fiber optic cables after one that connects Tonga to the rest of the world was severed during the eruption of a volcano, which triggered a tsunami, leading to Tonga's 110,000 people being cut off. Notes Jane Wakefield of the BBC. New Zealand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says it could take over a month to repair. In the meantime, a 2G wireless connection has been established on the mainland using a satellite dish. And so the cable's believed to be broken about 23 miles offshore. And so I've always been fascinated with underwater cables. Like, how do they get there? Who maintains them? What happens if it breaks? So I found out, how do you fix it? Well, Miss Wakefield explains that a cable repair boat will be sent to the location of the break and uses either a ROV, remotely operated underwater vehicle, which is just cool, or a tool known as a grapnel, which is a hook and a chain, to retrieve the broken end, and that will then they will rejoin a fresh cable on board the boat. So it hooks it, brings it onto the boat, and then rejoins the new cable. The whole process takes between 5 to 7 days. Around the world, there are an estimated over 400 different cables spanning distances of 800,000 miles. For reference, if you drive across America, that's 3,000 miles. So that's a lot of miles. And if you look at a map, all of these cables kind of snake through oceans and hug coastlines. It's estimated that globally there are about 200 repairs carried out every year, but natural disasters causing them are rare. 90% of breakages come from fishing boat nets or anchors. In Western countries, if one cable breaks, it's not a problem because there are many others. The UK has about 50 cables feeding data into the country.
On that topic, Marcus, it's I don't know if you saw Tonga's, just the resilience of the country is outstanding.
Yes.
They've obviously been isolated for a long time, but they allowed in, I think it was 2 people from New Zealand because they have such a low COVID rate. They wanted to maintain really strict admission protocol. The other big takeaway I would make is that Tonga's internet is going to be up and running quicker than Comcast can fix in most people's homes.
It's very true. Sorry, Comcast, but that's just true. That's all we've got time for this episode. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you to Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you to Paul.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you to Blake.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, of course, to Victoria. She edits the show and keeps the podcast moving. Thanks to everyone listening. To ask us questions or just say hi, you can email us at podcast@emarketer.com. We'll see you guys on Monday, hopefully, for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by smartly.io. Happy weekends.